Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reworking this abstract piece that I created a couple of years ago. So the plan is I'm hoping to generate some 3D flowers on here, and then I'm going to look at maybe knocking back the tones and things, but still keeping this design going. And I'm feeling, because it's green, that's why I want to create some florals. So I have been playing around with some texture paste. So I've got some Matisse impasto medium, which I have been playing around with on a board here to see if I can actually create flowers with this medium. So yeah, I'm just going to go for it. There's not any planning or anything involved in this. It's just going to be a case of we'll create the flowers, build up the texture and the layers, and then we'll come back and see what needs to be done with the background and how I'm then going to paint the flowers. So I've got no real plan other than I'm putting flowers in this area. So without further ado, let's get into it. Right, let's go for it. So let's get our texture paste and our large spatula, or palette knife I should call it. I keep calling it spatula, but it's actually a palette knife. So let's get into it. So I'm actually going to start by just scraping some of the medium onto the knife, she says. So scrape some onto the knife and then we're going to go for it. So I'm thinking that the main flowers, maybe there'll be about 3 here. So I'm just going to go with the central one, and I'm just going to start by placing down the texture. Now I don't want to put it too close to the centre, so I'm going to go around in a bit of a circle here, just so, because I'm going to add some extra layers in the middle. I don't worry too much about it because we're going to use the brush to tidy up areas as we move around. And maybe a bit too much there, but just pull that in. Now with my left hand, so now with the brush I'm just going to dip it in a little bit of water and then just start pulling from the centre out, because I don't want to lose any of the height at the back. I'm just going to pull the brush up and just pull and create those shapes, and like I say, still keep some of this height at the back. Now let me zoom in a little bit so you can see a bit better. There we go. So I'm just going to pull that up to create the shapes. Now I can use paper towel to just wipe any excess off the brush. And then actually, I mean, I don't actually need to use, because it's still quite wet, I don't actually need to use water, but you can use water if you want. Now I quite like how this has created a nice shape here, and I want to retain that, so I'm just going to come underneath and just pull the texture out a little bit. Now these are not going to be perfect flowers, they're not supposed to represent any flowers in particular, it's just more abstract to go with the abstract background. So each flower is going to be unique as we pull this texture out. Quite liking that so far. So now we're going to do the same with an inner layer, which is not going to have as many petals going around the outside, and I'm just going to use a small blob on the palette knife, and then where we've got the these areas coming into the centre, I'm just going to start there just so that we've got a little bit of variation in the shape. Now I am trying to get maybe 4 or 5 petals here. But again, don't worry too much about the shape, because we are going to come back and use the brush to help mould it slightly into our desired shape. And we want to maintain a lot of the depth and the texture around the back here, so be mindful to not press down too hard. So now, using the smaller palette knife, I'm going to add the detail to the center. So I'm just going to add some smaller blobs in the center. So now I've completed the first flower, I'm now going to do the same and create 2 more of a similar size. So now I'm going to intersperse some smaller flowers in amongst these. So I'm still going to go with the same spatula, but I'm just going to make them a bit smaller, a bit tighter. So I'm using the brush to create a little bit more definition between the petals. So I'm using now a slightly different size palette knife, because this one's a little bit too large and this one's a bit too small, so I'm going with a medium size round tip just to make some smaller petals. So I'm just going to add some small ones in and around, and I'm also going to do just some random buds. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up this little bag with some of the texture paste, and then I'm going to use it to create lines and texture that way. So I'm just going to spoon generous amount, if I can get it in there, into the bag. Easier said than done. Right. So I'm going to push that down inside there. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a small hole in this corner, and then I might have to increase the size of the hole when I see how large the lines are. So I'm going to follow the shape. Sorry you can't see too much of them, my camera won't go high enough. So I'm going to try and follow the shapes that I already have existing, and that way, and what I will do, I'll actually spin it round so you can see a bit better. So I'll follow the shapes and create some lines. And so I'm just going to follow the contours. Move this out the way. So I'm actually going to move this round so I can get to it a bit easier. Now we'll see if I can tidy those lines up a little bit. So just using a little bit of water, I'm just going to see if I can tidy those lines up and perhaps join them back up a bit. Not ideal, but it's all a learning curve, and it's interesting that I've actually got, it's actually quite ridged, so it's making for some really nice texture. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some little blobs of texture, just to make them look like little rosettes of flowers. And I'm finding if I press down slightly, let me get in closer. So I get in and just squeeze out the mixture and just push it round, I get like a little raised lump of paste. So now I'm going to put little blobs of paste to make it look like there's some leaves or flowers, or however you want to look at it. Now they're not a very good shape, but I will shape them a bit better. And now, just using a palette knife, I'm just pulling some of those lumps out and blending them a little bit more with the background to give them the impression that they are some abstract leaves. And then I'm going to do the same across the whole piece, so I'm adding some extra lines and leaves, and I'm going to use the palette knife to drag the paste out and create a series of leaves, and I'll go around and fill the board with the leaves and shapes and patterns. I decided to go back and alter the little blobs that I'd created earlier, so using a plastic clay tool that's used for polymer clay and what have you, I'm just going back in and I'm creating a little pocket in the centre. So I'm going to go around and do that with all of the raised ones, because I decided I didn't like them. Now you'll find throughout this that there's quite a lot of things that I don't like, and I change quite a bit throughout the process, so apologies for this really long video, but I felt that it would be a good way to show you how, if I'm not liking something, how you can go back and change it and get it to a place where you like it a lot more. So as I go around, I'm just adding some extra texture. I'm looking to see whether it needs more in certain areas, and I'm just pulling out extra texture to help find a little bit more balance across the piece. So again, using the palette knife, I'm just adding the texture, and then I'll go back in and create the divots and shapes with a variety of different tools. Now, using my little bag of texture, I'm now creating some small dots and raised areas in and around the flowers and the leaves, just to give a little bit more dimension to the piece. So I'm just going to fill in between areas and just give it some elevations. That way when we come to paint it later, we've got a lot more depth with the texture. Now you can really go to town and create lots of interesting shapes. So here again, I'm just putting in the blobs that I did earlier, but I'm going to pull them out and bring them out more to the outer edges, so that we've got not just the texture concentrated in the center, it is going to move out towards the outer edges, so that it gives it a little bit more balance. And then once that's started to cure and dry a little bit, I'm then going to go back and place the clay tool in the centre to hollow out the centre again, because the plan is to, when I come to paint, is to add a little bit of contrasting colour in the centre of these pieces. Hello and welcome back. So all this is now hardened off and it's all dry. So now what I want to do is to knock back some, I'll just show you, knock back some of these colours here, and then I'm going to paint over with gesso and then add some paler colours, and then I'll then work on the flowers and paint them up. Now I actually wanted to show you, I actually quite like this area here, this colour, so I want the background to be more muted like this. So, but like everything, when I start it could change, so I'm just going to start by painting with some gesso, and then I'm going to just add a hint of colour on as we go. I'm trying to get the lid off. That doesn't want to come off, I'll try that in a sec. And I'm also going to be using a Payne's grey for darker areas and a forest green for the background colour. Now let me go and try and get the lid off this gesso. I got there in the end. And then brush I'm using is just a Montmartre wide, flat wide Teflon brush, and I can't see what size that says there. 50mm brush, and it's nice and soft, and that's what I'm going to be applying the gesso. So I'm just going to go in and cover this with the white, making sure to get into every nook and cranny. Now I am still painting in the direction of the original texture because I can see that underneath. I mean, you can't see it there, so I'm actually taking the brush, so the brush strokes are still following that original texture. Now at this stage I'm not worrying too much if some of the colours beneath are showing through, because I'm going to be using those similar colours anyway, so that's fine. By painting it white you can now see more of the texture showing through, and that's what I actually want to show off more. And now that I've got a good coverage of gesso, now what I want to do is, using the edge of the brush, I want to actually start creating a bit more texture with the brush by using it on its edge and pulling it down, and I can actually get some lines, and this is going to help me with the flow of the paint later. So I'm just following the lines with the brush and putting plenty of paint gesso down to get that texture that I want. Now you could use a palette knife also, but I wanted it to have some lines. Now this area here is just not so much going to have so much in the way of lines, but I just still want some texture in this area. So while this is still wet, I've put a little bit of Payne's grey on the board here and a little bit of the forest green along with some of the white, and now I'm going to start adding some darker colours to the centre. So I'm going to start with the forest green. Now the gesso is still wet, so I'm going to use that to help blend those colours. So now I want to add a little bit of stronger green around the centre and then pulling it out a bit more. So I'm going to go in with quite a bit of green, of the forest green, and then start just dabbing it in around the centre. And I'm not worrying too much about the flowers at the moment because I'm going to come back and paint them, repaint them when this is dried. Now as you can see, I'm rotating the board so that I can look at it from different angles, and then it's easier for me to pull the paint down towards me than it is to try and push it away. So I'm trying to make it easy to see and to work on. So I'm concentrating on separate areas, so I'm now going to work on this area around here. Now I want this area to remain quite light, but I don't want it to be a stark white. So I've got a little bit of the forest green on my brush, and I'm going to just add the white, and then you'll get the tints of the green coming through. As you can see, I'm dabbing the paint on rather than painting over the texture. This is to make sure that the paint gets in between the nooks and crannies. And then I'll come back and smooth it out. So now what I want to do is I want to get in around the flowers to bring them out a little bit more. So I'm actually going to use a bit of Payne's Grey using a smaller brush to get in and add a bit more depth. So I'm mixing the Payne's Grey with a touch of the forest green so that we've got shadows. So yeah, so just a bit of the forest green in with some of the Payne's Grey, so it just darkens up that green. And I'm just going to go in and add a bit of depth to the flowers. Now don't worry, again, like I say, I'm going to paint the flowers white. I'm going to come back and do that later. Now the original paint is still wet, so what I'm doing is I'm just blending it with the wet paint underneath, so that way I don't get any harsh lines, so I get a shadow effect but no hard lines, so I can dab it in with the paint and then blend the colours out a touch. So now I'm going to add some ink because I want to add a little bit more interest to it, so I'm just going to the ink will go in to all the crevices, so that's the idea of using some ink, plus it gives a bit of vibrancy to the piece also. So now I'm going to start painting in the flowers. So I'm just going to paint some gesso on the flowers just to first of all lift them back out again, and then I'm going to go back in and tint them properly. I'm using my finger to do some of the raised edges so I can just see. So now using my finger, I'm just going to pick out the top edges of the texture in the white. I don't like it, so I'm going to go over it again with the gesso and start again. So I've decided to make the flowers the hero of the piece, so that's why I'm knocking back the colours. I felt it was not working before, and now that I'm knocking back the colours I feel that it's starting to blend a bit better. So I am going to lift up some of the ink and then just continue it round. Welcome back, it's day 3, and now I'm going to start painting these flowers. So I'm using a titanium white. This is how my white's looking at the moment, which is a Matisse white. You can see it's well loved. So I've just placed a little bit on this piece of scrap foam board, and I'm now going to start painting the details on this flower. So I want to make sure that I've got it all covered in the white so that it stands out from the background, and then I'll come back in and finish off with additional colours to help it pop. And because it's all textured, it's not that easy to get into the nooks and crannies, so you just need to make sure that you give the brush a little wiggle round so that you get into all those crevices. Now I don't want to paint the outside of the flowers, so what I'm doing is I'm actually dragging the brush across the top just to make sure that the paint stays within the flower and doesn't end up on the sides. Now I've decided I don't like the white on the green, so I'm just going to wipe it off, and I'm thinking I might use gold instead in those areas. So what I'm going to use some alcohol inks, the gold, and I'm going to, because it's got the little nozzle, and I'm actually going to put some of the gold into the centre of the well, and then using a brush I'm just going to pull it up to the edges. Oh yeah, I like that much better. Yeah, I like that. So that's what I'm going to do. So just let me move you up here. So what I'm going to do is just in the centre of these little wells, I'm going to place some gold and then move it around with the brush. Now using my brush I can actually pull some more into the other areas. Yeah, I like that. I may well come back and paint the flowers green again and then put the gold in. I'll make a decision on that, but for the time being I'll go on with just adding gold to the centres of these textural pieces. So the gold actually goes quite a long way. So I'll keep going until it dries up a little bit. So I've not painted these pieces yet, so I'm going to try these with the gold and see if I prefer them over the white. So just let me add a touch more gold just to the central areas and just see if this is what I like. Yeah, I think I like that better. When you stand away from it, you see it stands out a lot more. Yeah, I'm going to continue doing that and then I'll address those white ones later. So for this area I'm actually thinking that to lift out the highlights I'm just going to add, so I'm using the little these little areas as like an inkwell, so I'm just going to grab a little bit of the gold paint and just pick out the textures in these flowers, or leaves I should say. I'm also thinking I'll put some gold in between these lines, just to help them stand out also. So I'm just going to use the brush to just drag it through and just let it fade, colour fade away. So I might need a little bit more. What I'll do is I'll put it in there like a little inkwell. And then just colour in between. So now I'm going to add some leaves in the gold. So just the impression that some leaves are there. I'm going to come back in later with some additional texture. So I will wait for it to dry and then I'll come back and add some gold ribs for the leaves, just so that they stand out a little bit more. So now what I want to do is follow the ridge down the centre of each of these leaves. So I'm just going to just drag this across the surface. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. Okay, so I'm now going to paint these green again, and then when it's dry come back and fix these. So I'm just going to add the ink. And spread that. That's the beauty of creating these things. If you don't like it, you can change it. You can come back and create something new, add to it, so that you eventually get something that you really like. So I'm getting there slowly with it. So I'm hoping that this will finally be what I've been looking for. Now I do like using ink because ink creeps into all the crevices, so where it's closer to the edge it's actually a bit darker. So welcome back again. So as you can see, I've now painted these gold also, and now I'm going to go in and start creating some highlights. So I've bought a selection of these porcelain paints outliners. Now I bought these because these are really good at doing very fine detail but also giving you some texture. So I've got a pewter, this one's anthracite and gold, and I'm going to start adding some extra detail to these. So I'm going to start by, just let me move you in. So I'm just going to start by adding some small dots and lines and things in between the flowers, so just to start giving a little bit of extra dimension to the piece. So I'm just doing some small dots. So let me get in a bit closer so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just squeezing out a small amount of the material, and I'm just creating some dots just for a bit of added interest. Now obviously you could mix your own paint and put them into squeezy bottles, but I just find this to be quite handy because you've got good control over the dots and lines. Now I will show you in a little while what it's like doing some lines. So you could also do some swirls, so let me just perhaps put a little swirl in here. So just start with a blob in the centre, and then I'm just going to go round and create some swirls. So it is like a form of doodling. So these are really good for creating some straight lines and squiggly lines and things as well. So as you can see, it's adding a little bit of extra dimension to the piece and a little bit of extra detail. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do some outlines of some leaves, just for some a little bit more detail. So now I'm going to add some black dots in to give a bit of contrast in the shadow areas. So now all I'm doing is just adding some extra detail in the flowers. Now finally I'm going to add some black swirls just to give a little bit more contrast and pull it out from the centre a little bit. So I'm just gonna, and I'm not worrying if if they're a bit broken. The idea is just to give it a little bit of extra contrast. So I'm going to leave this now overnight, and then I'll take a look at it tomorrow and see if it needs anything else. Now this is a prime example of overworking a piece. So when I decided to add the texture, I liked it at first. So when I was changing the green and adding the gesso and then adding a touch of the green in there, I was liking how that was looking. However, I ended up overworking it and then really didn't like it. So that was why I repainted the gesso and started again. So while it's not quite, the background's not quite what I liked about it, I am happy with the end result, especially with the gold on the green background. I think that's actually worked quite well, so I'm pleased with that. So I hope you liked this video and it wasn't too long-winded for you. Please leave some comments below on your thoughts on it. So until next time, bye for now.